The sun, skin cancer, protection, safe sunscreens, so many different topics that are associated when the weather is like this, isn't it? We want to be outside, we want to enjoy the sunlight, it's good for the soul, it's even good for the skin, but we hear these threatening noises around anything related with skin cancer, sun and sunscreens. So let me shed a little bit light on this and give you a couple of tips today. I'm Kirstin Nussgruber from Kirstin'sCancerCare.com. And why do I talk about these things? Well, basically, I'm a cancer survivor and I need to live a life in which I try and optimize my risk exposure. I've also had skin cancer twice. That's something that not many of you know. So my actual cancers were related to my breasts. But then skin cancer popped up and it was the mild version of it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the different types of skin cancers as well. But nevertheless, it was a result of the accumulation of damage occurred probably during my childhood. I grew up in sunny South Africa, and in some way, shape or form, skin cancer developed on my skin. So what do? Do I lather on sunscreen? Do I protect myself all the time? And why does it matter? I have an excellent blog on this topic too, but here I'm going to limit myself to about 7 to 10 minutes of tips for you. And I'm going to post the link to my blog at the end of this in the comments section as well, and you can read up more about it. I did quite a bit of extensive research to kind of explain why we need to be wary of the sun's rays, and we need them as well. We can't just fully avoid them, and by just lathering on sunscreen and thinking we're protecting ourselves, that's not always the solution either. So why are the UVB, UVA rays, why is that important? Why are they dangerous? Well, there are different types of electromagnetic waves from the sun that we need to be wary of. And the most well-known are the UVB and UVA rays. And the UVB ones are the ones that cause sunburn, and they're the ones that really lead to about 95% of the radiation that actually hits the earth, that penetrates through the atmosphere. Now, they are also seasonally based. They're going to be strongest in the summer months. However, the UVA rays, they actually are intense the entire year round, including the winter months. So we need to be really, really careful with those. There are other waves too, like UVC, and they really are important in countries where the hole in the ozone is more prevalent, such as Australia. So here in the United States at this point in time, UVA, UVB is what we need to be wary of all year round, because remember, UVA affects us all year round. UVBs are the ones that can reflect off shiny surfaces. That would be water, so that would be pool sides, it can be beaches, but it can also be snow when you go skiing in the winter. Now, the problem is that the damage that it causes to the skin's layers, that accumulates over time. And that's the problem here. So by the time skin cancer is often diagnosed, you have been exposed to the damaging rays for quite some years. So just to think I've been doing this for so long and nothing has happened to me at this point in time is not really the safe solution either. Now, the different types of skin cancer, what do we need to be wary of here? So I'm only going to focus on 3. The most well-known ones, that's basal cell carcinoma. That's a type of skin cancer that affects the outermost layers of the skin, and it's the type that I was diagnosed with twice in 2 different parts of my face. Now, they generally do not lead to more serious cancer. They don't necessarily lead to metastasized cancer either, but they can certainly damage the layers of the skin as well, and they can even lead to some bone damage as well. In particular, this is the next kind of layer up, is the squamous cell skin cancer type. They both look similar. They can be dry patches, scaly. They can range in color from anything from skin color to slightly pinkish. They can be a little bit raised or a little bit of a bump. When it becomes melanoma, which is the most feared type of skin cancer, because melanoma can affect other organ systems, it means that that cancer can spread and can metastasize, and suddenly you're diagnosed with cancers of the lung or the liver or even leukemia or the blood. or lymphoma, and that as a result coming actually from melanoma, from skin cancer. They are the ones that we need to look out for and analyze when things go wrong. They are often dark in shape, although they don't have to be. They can have irregular boundaries, they can itch or bleed, and they generally change. And we are very familiar with that because overall in the media this information gets spread rapidly. So we also need to understand that most of our skins are covered with all kinds of other little patches, moles included, and moles don't necessarily mean they're going to turn into skin cancer or melanomas, although we obviously have to watch them for changes. We also have other little patches, sometimes little scaly dry patches, and they are called actinic keratoses. So again, a dermatologist is the person to really give you a full spectrum analysis of whether that is a potential skin cancer or not. What I had on my face could have been a keratoses. It was just a little scaly little patch, tiny, tiny, tiny. It turned out to be basal cell skin cancer. So you kind of want to keep an eye on it and have a professional look at it. It's kind of like for us women, going to the OBGYN once a year. Kind of going to see your dermatologist is a good thing to do, especially if you know that you have already moles on your skin. So, moving on, sunscreens. How do we protect ourselves against the sun, the glorious, glorious sun? Let's look at sunscreens, because that's really what this Facebook Live is about, is giving you some tips on how to practice safe sun protection. Now, sunscreens serve two purposes really, right? They have to protect you from the damaging effects of the sun. But they also have to adhere to the skin. They have to form a barrier or at least be active on the skin's surface. So you really can classify sunscreens into two categories: chemically based ones and mineral based ones. So let me focus on the chemical based ones first, because they're the ones where we need to be a little bit careful here. So think about it. A chemically based sunscreen lotion, how does that protect you? It protects you by blocking the damaging UVA and UVB rays from actually being absorbed into skin. So it absorbs them before it hits the skin. That means that it has to form a layer or barrier on your skin, adhere to the skin, and in itself penetrate the skin. And it needs to have certain chemicals, because it's a chemical reaction that does this. It needs to have certain chemicals in its mix-up that allows it to be able to do this function. And that's where it can get tricky, because you can have active and inactive ingredients that can potentially be toxic to you. Now, there are a number of names you need to be careful of, and I'm not going to pretend that I know them off by heart. I have them written down here. I'm going to read them to you, and again, if you go and read my blog after this, you will see a list of them there. But these are the main ones you kind of want to be wary of, and one in particular one is the oxybenzone one. There's another O one, the octinoxate one, all right? Then there's octocrylene as well. So there are a couple of these really complicated names. I want you to remember one name orally, right? Audibly here, oxybenzone. Now with oxybenzone, they have found this to be damaging to many of the coral reefs on the earth, particularly in Hawaii and the Caribbean. Why there? Well, there are a lot of tourists there, and a lot of the water washes off sunscreen that you've applied to all the bodies of all these millions of tourists, and they've actually found that oxybenzone damages the DNA of the coral reefs. Now, coral reefs are live organisms, and oxybenzone has been found to be damaging to the coral reefs, but also it's been found in seafood, in certain fish as well, and it also has been found in the US population. About 96% of us, actually, according to the United States Skin Cancer Foundation and the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention as well, have found that we have oxybenzone in us, because it can be measured in blood, in urine, and also even in breast milk. So that kind of leaves some food for thought. And the question, of course, here is, well, have there been studies on humans that show that these chemicals cause or contribute to cancer? And this is where we have to again say, well, we don't have enough so-called controlled studies that can clearly link that there is an association between these chemicals and actual cancer. We can, though, say that it has been shown in studies, for example, on fish, on the sea ocean population, in particular coral reefs too, that it can lead to DNA damage, to an accumulation of toxicity, and that it can actually influence our endocrine or our hormonal system. So we know that. We don't conclusively, from a scientific point of view, know that there's a link to actually causing cancer as such. But again, let's rather err on the side of caution here. And if we are knowingly destroying coral reefs, maybe that is some food for thought, and we should be cautious about what we actually put on our skin, what gets absorbed into our skin. Our skin is porous, remember that. Then we move on to the mineral-based sunscreens, because they are deemed to be safer. And we're really looking at two ingredients here, titanium dioxide and zinc oxide. Those are the two main ones being used. So the zinc oxide is the one that really is the white, greasy stuff that you see. In the olden days, they used to show in movies like windsurfers, right? They would have these white noses. That's the zinc oxide in it, because mineral-based sunscreens, the way they act and protect us from the damaging UVA and UVB rays is by forming a protective barrier. They kind of block off the radiation and they kind of reflect it away from the skin. Rather than changing it, all right, through a chemical reaction, they just form a tight barrier. So you can imagine that's why we have to have this kind of sheen on our skins. Titanium dioxide is a little bit more clear, and I think personally that the more natural sunscreens have come a long way in being easier to apply and not leaving too much of a residue. But if you don't like that chalkiness or that feeling that you have a residue with the more natural sunscreen lotions, it's the way they work. It's just part of them, and you are indeed protecting yourself. At least you're not applying some of these chemicals that we know can cause or disrupt even our hormone systems and can accumulate as toxins in our bodies, because they can actually be measured. Now, you may have heard the term nanoparticles being linked to titanium dioxide and zinc dioxide. So let me clear that up a little bit. So nanoparticles are tiny, tiny, tiny particles, and we find them everywhere. So they're not just linked to these two minerals that we find in more natural sunscreens. They think of dust. Dust has nanoparticles. All minerals have nanoparticles. It's a very natural form. Where it gets tricky is we could potentially, if we inhale them, for example, in spray screens, right, or in loose powders, you know, we can inhale them or ingest them. If we have them on our lips, you know, that can, you know, with our lips, that can get into our system. We're not 100% sure what damage it can potentially do, particularly to our lungs. Can our lungs clear them if we apply them on a consistent basis coming from these more natural sunscreens? So we just need to be a little bit mindful here of that. And my advice would be here is to try and avoid the sprays, and try and also avoid the loose powders in makeup. We don't have to have the UVA, UVB protection in the form of powders or nanoparticles in makeup foundation. Let's rather go to something that a lotion that we can really apply and that isn't exposed in the air, right? Or even on our lips. Need to be careful with that as well. So again, nanoparticles, where you might find some manufacturers saying there are no nanoparticles in our products. Well, if there are some minerals in your products, you're going to naturally have some nanoparticles in it. So let's just be mindful of that. We have them everywhere. All right. So what do we do? How do we protect ourselves? And here are 6 tips for you that I want to give you. In my blog, I've given you 12. I'm not going to focus on all of those here, but at least 6 of them. So, well, the usual, right? Let's be mindful of the time we expose ourselves. So although we know that UVA rays are active and intense all year round, but we also know that the UVB rays are most intense during the summer seasons and during midday between 10 and 2 to 3 p.m. in the day. So let's be careful about exposure in that time. clothing. There are lots of sun protective clothing and headgear and eye gear out there. We can make that cool. And if we go to Australia, you know, they have a much larger problem down there, so they're the experts in the field. Let's follow their example. All right, so protective clothing, that's absolutely a cool thing to do. That's not a weird and awful thing to do. That's a pretty cool thing to do. All right, deficiencies in vitamins, and particularly vitamin D, believe it or not, and also vitamin B3, or also known as niacin or niacinamide. So there are cases of skin cancer diagnoses where people have been very deficient, in particular in B3, vitamin B3. So let's focus on making sure that we aren't deficient, and particularly in D as well. Now, vitamin D we can make if we expose our skin to the sun, but remember, we really need to have a large area of our bodies exposed, and it needs to be exposed for at least 20 to 30 minutes without any sunscreen lotion applied. And we need to have an oily fat barrier on our skin, because it's a fat soluble vitamin. It needs fat to be converted to the active form of D in the outer layers of our skin. And we really, you know, with our daily showering, we actually suppressing our body's ability to turn the sun exposure that we're giving ourselves to vitamin D. So we just have to understand the mechanisms at play here. And just because it's summer and we are outside and exposing ourselves, that does not necessarily mean that now my vitamin D levels are going to rise. Actually have yourself tested. You'll be surprised. A lot of my clients are chronically vitamin D deficient during summer as well, and even if they have darker skin as well. So those two deficiencies, B3 in particular, all our Bs are important, but B3 in particular, and vitamin D. Then, of course, avoid the sprays and avoid the powders. Again, I've mentioned that before. Let's rather go back to ointment, rubbing it on. And as I've said as well before, they've come a long way. There's some good brands out there, and you will find them if you check on the Environmental Working Group's website. They actually have a guide to sunscreens. What they do is they rate them according to the ingredients that the manufacturers disclose. So yes, they're dependent on the fact that a manufacturer has to say, these are the products that I'm creating and these are the ingredients I'm using. But think about it. You as a manufacturer, you knowing that more and more people are turning to this not-for-profit organization, the Environmental Working Group, or EWG, because they provide so much good information for us to be able to make smart decisions. So as a manufacturer, I actually want to have my product rated highly on them. So it really is in my interest to provide enough information, and the EWG will actually state so. So if they don't have enough information, and if they have to base their rating on limited amounts of information that was disclosed, they will actually say that. So you kind of go and judge for yourself what you think of that particular product. But that's really my advice to you. I can't give you a particular brand name because there are a couple of brands out there, and within those, find which one suits you. I found that that's a very subjective view as well in terms of how easy they spread on, because remember, they're supposed to be a little bit chalky, a little bit more thick to spread on. They have titanium dioxide and zinc oxide in them, and depending how much more of the one or the other will really depend on how easier they can spread onto your skin. And apply it liberally and frequently, especially if you're outside a lot and if you are swimming a lot. These layers, you're offering a protective barrier that needs to be reapplied on a continuous basis as well. So, and lastly, see your dermatologist. I'm not being sponsored by any dermatologist, seriously not, but I've just found it incredibly useful, because look at your bodies, right? You're going to have lots of little moles and patches and things happening there, and you want an expert to chart that, and that's why you want to keep on going to the same dermatologist, because they have a record of everything, literally everything, and you'll be surprised where you find little moles that you didn't expect them to be. In between your toes, behind your ears, inside your ears, in between your butt cheeks, anywhere you can have little moles, and you kind of want to chart them, and especially in places that you can't really look at, and make sure that they don't turn into potential cancerous cells. They don't have to be dark and irregular. They can be pinkish in color too. That can still be skin cancer. So I hope I've given you an overview. It didn't scare you off being outside in this beautiful weather. Wear a hat as well, remember, so we can get little moles and bumps up here too in our hair. So become familiar with your body, know what your body feels like as well. Look at it in the mirror. And my sunglasses are going to pop off my head in a moment. So I'm going to post the link to my blog here too. Read it. I've used a lot of evidence-based research in that as well, and it gives you a little bit more information as well. So enjoy the sunshine while you can, but just be mindful. Think of shade, right? Think of clothing, and still enjoy the summer and the sunshine when we have it. So again, Kirstin'sCancerCare.com is my website. You'll find blogs there. You can find me on Facebook as well. My name, Kirstin Nussgruber. You can find me on LinkedIn and also on Instagram. I have a great program to offer you, First Steps to Take Charge of Your Cancer Care. And just, sign up for my newsletter if you want to. I share some tips and tricks there as well, just so that we can live a life that we feel we are doing enough and we're doing the steps that are necessary to take control of our health. So take care for now and have a gorgeous day, and check again next time when I have a Facebook Live.